Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football Depth Chart Prediction Season. One of my favorite kind of off-season episodes to do. One, college football season. It's coming. It means it's close, but I think more importantly, we've spent weeks and months breaking down this Nebraska roster, reading spring practice notes, reading fall camp notes, talking about breakout players. Now we get the opportunity to kind of call our shots, project what this starting unit looks like for Nebraska on both sides of the football. Now, two quick disclaimers. One, this is not my depth chart. Many of the Nebraska fans who've been rocking with the boys, y'all know we just kind of use this as a little bit of a visual. We're actually going to make some significant changes to what we see on the screen. And I think more importantly, would love to hear from the Nebraska fans in the comments section. One of the things we've talked about this Nebraska team heading into 2024, man, it's deep. I think a lot of players play for this football team in 2024. So you might not agree with some of my projected starters. I probably agree with you in the comment section that a lot of players that you might shout out, I think are going to play a lot as well. So would love to get some feedback from you guys as well in the comment section. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Again, the support the Nebraska fans have shown all offseason long, whether we're talking recruiting, whether we're previewing 2024, it's been amazing. Appreciate you guys. And without further ado, let's get into this one. Let's start at the top here. Quarterback position, Dylan Raiola. Now, I think Henrik Harburg, I think he's going to play. I mean, Matt Rhule, every time he talks about this kid is saying, hey, he's a good football player. That's his words, not mine. I mean, he's a good football player. We got to figure out how to use him. I think you could see some design packages for a guy like Harburg to kind of balance out and maybe take a little bit of the load, so to speak, off true freshman starter Dylan Raiola, but you make no mistake about it at the top. I mean, Dylan Raiola is going to be starting for this Nebraska offense in 2024. Looking at the running back room, this is, I think, a really fascinating room where it's going to be a very heavy rotation. I think there's 3 or 4 running backs that get a lot of work for Nebraska in 2024, which I think is massive because you go back to 2023, not only the injuries with Gabe Ervin and Ramir Johnson, and then Anthony Grant can hold on to the football. The depth for that Nebraska running back room last year was an absolute disaster. Now, who do I think is going to lead this unit in terms of rushing yards and attempts? I'm probably going to lean Emmett Johnson because I think he's the most complete running back that Nebraska has. You have a lot of different skill sets in this running back room. Guys like Gabe Ervin Jr., Dante Dowdle. I mean, 215 plus, built kind of like Mack Truck, so to speak. Talk about short yardage situations. You talk about fourth quarters when you're trying to grind opponents down. I think you could see more Gabe Ervin Jr. and Dante Dowdle in those situations. Then you talk about the third down situations. That's probably going to be Ramir Johnson. Obviously, a 6-year guy, knows what he's doing in pass protection and as a pass catcher. I think that kind of separates him from all the other running backs. So you got a lot of running backs in this room. I don't think it's fair to kind of point out a true starter, although I would go with Emmett Johnson. I think a lot of these running backs get a lot of burn in the 2024 year. Going to the wide receiver spot, let's start with the 2 wide receivers that I think this passing attack, really goes through in 2024. That's Jamal Banks and Isaiah Neyor. Jamal Banks, and we've said this a lot, he's kind of that true wide receiver one that Nebraska just didn't have last year. You talk about a guy that if it's 3rd and long and you need someone to create separation, sit it down in zone coverage and go make a play, that's Jamal Banks. Isaiah Neyor is that vertical threat at the wide receiver position who's very, very good with that football in the air. There was a lot of buzz around him going into the 2022 season with this Texas offense a couple of years ago, and suffered a knee injury, kind of couldn't get on the field. I think Isaiah Neyor, not necessarily for Nebraska fans, I think you guys know what you got with him. I think he might catch a lot of national college football fans by surprise in 2024. That third wide receiver position, I think, is going to be a heavy rotation. I probably would lean Jalen Lloyd to kind of operate as that slot wide receiver. Obviously, blazing speed, a lot of different things you can do with Jalen Lloyd, but I wouldn't be surprised if Ja'Cory Barney Jr., as a true freshman, gets incorporated because he's one of those guys that you can get him the football in space and go let him get to work. I mean, he's electric, kind of one of the more electric playmakers in this Nebraska offense. I think Ja'Cory Barney Jr. gets on the field, but I think you get a couple other guys as well, right? Malachi Coleman going into year 2. I would shout out a guy like Carter Nelson as well. And Matt Rhule, again, kind of the same thing we talked about with Harburg. Gardner Nelson's a really good football player, and we got to figure out ways to get him on the field year one as a freshman. I think Carter Nelson as that kind of jumbo slot, a guy that can block on the perimeter, that would make sense. And then Janarian Bonner, kind of a very similar story where Janarian Bonner is not going to be this dynamic pass-catching threat in red zones. That's where he can operate well. Also blocking on the perimeter. I mean, if you're going to use guys like Ja'Cory Barney or Jalen Lloyd on some screens and end arounds, trying to manufacture some explosive plays for your freshman quarterback, you want wide receivers that can get it done blocking on the perimeter. I think Janarian Bonner, is a guy that I think might be able to do that for Nebraska on the perimeter. Tight end position, Thomas Fidone. Now you look at the offensive line. This is where we're going to make some significant changes to what we see on the screen. I'm going to go starting at that left tackle spot, which is, again, by far, I think the biggest storyline for Nebraska the rest of fall camp is where can we go to kind of shore up that left tackle spot. I think you start the season with Turner Corcoran there. He's a guy that has played a lot of left tackle in the Big Ten, although it's been a rocky, inconsistent road for Turner Corcoran. At least you can rely that he has some experience. And when you have a true freshman quarterback in Dylan Rhule, I think the mindset should be we got to surround him with as much experience as we can, specifically on that offensive line. So I think week one, Turner Corcoran is going to be the guy. I would just keep an eyeball out for Gunnar Gatula, a guy that I think has a lot of talent that's only going to be a redshirt freshman, hasn't played a lot of football. I think he could work his way into potentially getting some snaps at left tackle. Then you look at the rest of the way, Justin Evans, locked to play guard. Ben Scott, locked to play center. Micah Mazakua, going to be your right guard. And then Bryce Benhart at right tackle. I think you feel really good about those four starting offensive linemen. If that left tackle position can kind of get itself figured out, I think Nebraska is going to be in an okay spot on the offensive line. And I think there are different ways that, maybe you can shore up that left tackle position, whether it's lining up an inline tight end, giving some chip, running back pass protection. If that's really the only hole that we see in this Nebraska offensive line, I think there are ways for an offense to really give help to a left tackle that might need that help in 2024. Going to the defensive side of the football, this is where it gets kind of just the bullets start flying, to be honest. Tony White's going to use, one, a lot of different players, two, in a lot of different positions. And I think the quote unquote starting Nebraska defense is going to look different based on what teams you're playing, right? If you're going to play Colorado week 2, a team that's going to spread you out, play with 4 wide receivers, you might see different players playing as opposed to when you play Iowa later in the season, when you kind of know you're going to get a lot of 2 tight end sets and kind of condensed formation. So you're going to see Nebraska get creative in terms of how they use this defense and how they use certain players in this defense. And I think they can do that because they got a lot of versatility. They got a lot of depth. You start on the defensive line, bona fide starters in Ty Nash and Jamari Butler. Jamari Butler, from what it sounds like, is really going to take a jump. He was sneaky good in 2023. If he kind of takes a step in 2024, that's a massive storyline for this Nebraska team at that jack spot. I'm going to go Prince Will U. I think Prince Will U was really surprisingly good as a true freshman. I say the word surprising, not because I thought he was going to be a bad football player, but I didn't think he was going to be ready to go as a true freshman. The physicality, the juice in the pass rush. I think he's probably the best pure pass rusher on this Nebraska defense. I think Nebraska's going to try to get him on the field a little bit more. I think MJ Sherman's a guy that has played some football. You kind of know what you're getting. I think Prince Will U probably has that ceiling that, for Nebraska fans, really excites you specifically in the pass rush. Looking at the 2 off-ball linebackers, I think Javin Wright is a lock to start. I thought he played as he got more comfortable playing off-ball linebacker. Keep in mind, this was a 2019 kid that has played cornerback, has played safety, then kind of transitioned to that off-ball linebacker spot. As he got more comfortable within that off-ball linebacker position, you saw him play some really good ball. And I think Javin Wright's going to be the best linebacker for this Nebraska team. I think he's going to be a bona fide starter, a guy that plays a lot of football consistently for Nebraska. Now, where's that other linebacker come from? I think this is kind of one of those examples where it kind of might depend on what team you're playing. You play Iowa, John Bullock's probably going to get a lot of reps. You play Colorado, John Bullock probably not going to play that much because he's not the best athlete in space. I would think Mackay is the next guy I would look for. And then Stephon Thompson I see as a guy that plays a lot of football, might not be a quote unquote starter, but he's going to be an edge rusher. I think he could play that jack spot, certainly could play off ball linebacker, that kind of utility piece that is, again, maybe not a bona fide or quote unquote starter, but very important to the Tony White defense. Devon Thompson is going to play a lot of football for Nebraska in a lot of different ways. You look back at the secondary, let's start at the boundary cornerback spot where Tommy Hill, a healthy Tommy Hill who's focused, is really, really good. Then on the other side of that, the boundary cornerback spot to start the season with Bly Hill, not really sure when he'll be full go. I'm going to go Sayre Wright. I mean, Sayre Wright was an underrated pickup for Nebraska. I think Sayre Wright is super talented. He's long, he's fast. He kind of checks off all the physical traits that you're looking for. And quite frankly, played a lot of good football for USC as a redshirt freshman in 2022. I think Sayre Wright is going to play a lot for Nebraska, especially early as Bly Hill continues to work back from that injury. I would throw in a guy like Jeremiah Charles, who is starting to really come on during fall camp, another super talented kid. Malcolm Hartzog, I think he'll be a nickel. I think that's where he's at his best. Now, if Sayre Wright or Jeremiah Charles are not ready to go at the boundary cornerback spot, you can very easily kick Malcolm Hartzog out to that boundary cornerback spot and get good play from him. But I think if you're Nebraska, you try to want to, at least in my opinion, make sure Malcolm Hartzog's playing in the right position. You look at the safety position, this is going to be a very fun but challenging task for Tony White. Isaac Gifford, Marquise Buford Jr., Sean Singleton. These are all, at least in my mind, all Big Ten caliber players. I would expect all three of them to play a lot, and I think the challenge for Tony White is how can we get them all on the field at the same time. I think a lot of the maybe national media look at Nebraska and say, all right, Isaac Gifford, we know he was really good for Nebraska in 2023, did it all. Not many people are talking about Sean Singleton, who was a freaking rock star the first couple of games of that season in 2023 before the injury. And then you kind of read about what's going on in fall camp. Sounds like he's picking right where he left off from that injury. I think Sean Singleton is going to be arguably maybe the best safety for this Nebraska team. And so how can you get all of this talent on the field at the same time? That's why you pay Tony White the big bucks, because you got to get creative, but you got a good problem to have here. And that's three really, really talented defensive backs that can do a lot of different things. You can move all these kids around and kind of find that best rotation for Nebraska in the secondary. I think the only question mark you have at the secondary spot is that boundary cornerback spot opposite Tommy Hill, with Bly Hill working back from injury. Now, outside of that, I think the secondary has a chance to be very, very good for Nebraska. We'll cut it there. Again, probably left out a lot of good players that I think are going to play. You look at guys like Elijah Judy having a really good fall camp, Riley Van Poppel, Cam Lenhart, a lot of guys that I think can play a lot of football for Nebraska that might not be quote unquote day one starters. Would love to hear from you guys in the comment section. Again, all the support means the world to the boys. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Appreciate you guys. We'll talk to y'all later.